I'm going to talk mostly about DD-WRT. This presentation, as you heard, this is kind of I'm throwing this in last minute here. I'd not planned on doing this, so if I'm not very well prepared, please, bear with me. But this was a presentation I put together for the local ISSA chapter in Louisville, and was going to present it with Adrian one day, and we ended up not doing that, and I haven't even thought about this since back in last May. But one of the things Adrian asked me to throw in there was a couple of comments about KISMAC. Adrian doesn't have a Mac, so he was wondering, how does KISMAC differ from Kismet? How many of you guys use Kismet or KISMAC? You guys familiar with that? Yeah, right. First thing I noticed was that the site that KISMAC is run from is out of Germany, and due to the hacking laws, they cannot distribute that anymore, so you have to go to other places. As you can see, their site's no longer up. Started looking at differences between them, and obviously I'm running on a Mac. But the main difference I saw was that KISMAC supports active mode, and active mode actually sends out beacons and allows you to, in theory, you would think you'd be able to see all the access points, but in reality, the specification says you can't detect hidden networks. So when I did this at my house, active scan showed me 10 access points, and passive scan showed me 15. So does anybody have a good reason why you would use the active scan in KISMAC? Anyway, that was the main difference I saw. I didn't see a whole lot of other differences in it, but Adrian and I were talking about that, so I threw a couple of slides in on that. Here's some differences between that, which I just mentioned there. Like I said, if you look down at the bottom there, or on the left, active mode cannot see hidden networks, so I'm not really sure why you'd want to use that. So you're really not, if you don't have a Mac, you're probably not missing out on too much. Main thing I wanted to talk about is DD-WRT. How many of you guys have used DD-WRT? Good bunch of you, probably a third probably. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about why would you want to do that, some of the advantages to it, and maybe a couple of neat tips about it. If you're not familiar with it, DD-WRT runs on just about any inexpensive Wi-Fi router. Linksys, not very many, I don't think any Netgears except for the latest one that's out. Asus, Buffalo is a popular brand. It lets you replace the firmware on your router and do a whole lot of cool things that you can't do with the default firmware. First time I saw this, I was having problems with my Linksys WRT54G just dropping off the network every few days, and I'd reboot it and it'd come back, and I finally decided, there's got to be a firmware update that fixes this. Firmware I looked at was already up to date, and I started, Googling it and found out that this code was available, and it's free, and it adds a whole bunch of new features. DD-WRT has become very popular. Now, last I looked, 93% of all Linksys routers now run DD-WRT, and the remaining 7% wish they were. That's a joke. It is pretty popular, though. Okay. How's that? First thing you need to do is decide which version you want to run. There are several different versions, and depending on your hardware, you may have to run the generic version or one of the micro versions, depending on how much flash and RAM you have to run. But that's the first thing to do, and if you go out to DD-WRT's website, there is a whole bunch of information. Look at your specific hardware and see what versions you can run. And if you haven't bought one yet and you're looking to buy one, that will help you decide which one to buy. Which is the next slide. In short, when I wrote this back in May, the Buffalo, the WHRG 125 was one of the cheapest 100% compatible routers that would run the full version. That's a good choice. There's some other ones that have came out since then. I almost bought one like last week, and Asus has one that has a lot of RAM and a lot of flash in it that is probably a better choice. Netgear also has one that they're claiming is an open router now. Has anybody played with that? No? That might be one to check out as well. The most popular one when this came out was the Linksys WRT54G. Probably a lot of you guys have that one. The problem with that one in particular is they're really cheap. You can get them at Walmart, that type thing. But the current releases, the newer releases of it, have a lot less flash and a lot less RAM. So the full versions won't run. So, there for a while I was running around Walmart's buying the old versions I could find, in the back of the shelf someplace. But now, you can still get them on eBay, that type of thing. But there's some better choices out there. Again, on the DD-WRT website, there's a lot of information on which ones you might want to select. There's a few comparisons right there on, to give you an idea of what the differences are. Like I said, when I put this together back in May, the Asus had 32 megs of RAM and 4 megs of flash, which was a pretty good combination for $69. So this is pretty inexpensive stuff. First thing you do, is flash the firmware. You can do this a variety of ways. Some of them are as simple as you boot up say it's a Linksys, and you go to the firmware update like you normally would through a web interface and say update, but you point it to the DD-WRT binary file. That's the easiest way. Some of them support that. You'll obviously want to check. There are very specific versions depending on your hardware, and some of them require a few extra steps. Some of them will do it directly through like I said, the web interface. Some of them you need to do a TFTP to it, which most of them it's as simple as you get ready for your TFTP, you hold down the reset button, you apply power to it, and you immediately hit enter. It's a little bit of a timing thing, and you might have to try it 2 or 3 times, but it's not that difficult. And depending on the model, some of the Linksys versions run VxWorks as the base operating system. You may have to get rid of that to free up enough RAM to have enough room to put DD-WRT on it. There's programs out there called VxWorks Killer that will free up the space and let you do that. Again, check the procedure for your router. It is possible to brick these things. If you don't apply the right thing or the right code or do the wrong process, it is possible. I've never had that happen, but it is possible. Here's just an example of how you would do that, and like I said, it's that easy. Down here at the bottom, I just went into TFTP, switched to binary mode, got a put command ready, to send that .bin file to it. Turn on the router with the reset button, and right as I do that, hit enter, and you'll see TFTP transfer the file. It'll reboot, and you're ready to go. Here's a little more detailed example of that, doing it via command line. Again, all this is out on DD-WRT's website. This is the first screen you'll see once you apply the code and you reboot it. You connect your PC to it, you get a DHCP address, you go to the router's address, which is usually 192.168.1.1, and you'll end up at this login screen. The default username and password is root and admin. I suggest changing that. There is a info page that you probably want to turn off if you're not going to apply encryption to your network. If you leave this page on, it gives up a lot of information about your network you probably don't want to do. So if you're not going to secure your network and limit it to just people you approve of, you probably want to turn that off. Just some other basic things to do. Turn off HTTP. You probably want to do that. You don't want to be getting to the admin page on an unencrypted protocol. Again, disable the site. The info site, or add encryption to the router. You can change your MAC address as well if you want to, for whatever reason. And there is an option there about midway down the page there for internet management. You might have a reason to do that, but of course in most cases you don't want people on the internet to be able to hack your router. It allows SSH access, which I would recommend turning on. If you have SSH turned on, you can go to the router and do command line interface. It's a Linux operating system, so there's quite a few things you can do through that interface. That's a good thing to enable. It defaults to a 5-second delay on boot, which I would recommend leaving in place. That is a time period where it says I'm going to wait 5 seconds in case you're trying to TFTP a flash update or a firmware update to me. If you disable that, you probably won't get the timing right, and you'll kind of be out of luck, so just leave that alone. Get to some of the other features. You're saying, why would I want to do this to my router? It's working fine the way it is. I'm going to go through some of the features, things that you can do on this. But basically, DD-WRT, and there's a couple other flavors of this out there. There's Tomato. There's a couple others that I haven't played with. But DD-WRT is probably the most widely used, and there's a ton of things you can do. Basically, your $50 Linksys router can function like a $700 or $800 Cisco router. I mean, literally, you can get that kind of functionality out of them. This feature here is the frequency of the clock of the router, and I liken it to nitrous oxide. It'll make your car go faster, but you're putting a little bit of risk on that. You can increase the clock rate, but it's the same kind of thing on your PC. If you turn that up, you might burn something up as well. And unless you're doing something demanding, you probably don't need it anyway. There's a command section where you can put startup commands like you would on a Linux server or something. So if there's something specific you want the operating system to do, you can put that in the command box, and it'll do that on boot up. And of course, if you totally botch up the settings, there's a handy reset the whole config button. Once you've got it on the initial DD-WRT code, updates are easy from that point on. It's just through the web interface. Just point it to the new binary file and hit upgrade. It also has options to do backups of configs. Depending on how complex your network is, you might want to not have to document all of that and reproduce it at some point in the future. So it does have a backup and restore option. This is the basic configuration screen where you set up your WAN and your LAN interfaces. On the WAN side, it supports all the protocols you might expect and a few more. It does normal DHCP, so if you're plugging it into your cable modem or your DSL modem, it'll just automatically get addresses from it through DHCP. It'll also do PPTP or PPOE. It is a requirement to change the name to something cool. And the next section is network setup. Give it an IP address. For DHCP, it can be a forwarder or it can be a DHCP provider, which is kind of nice. The other thing is dynamic DNS. How many of you guys know what dynamic DNS is? Everybody know what that is? Most of you do. If you're trying to run servers, services from your house, if you run a mail server, web server, that type thing, and you have a dynamic address from your ISP, how do you do that? Well, dynamic DNS, and there's a few other protocols it supports, they will host your DNS, and what your router can do is automatically tell dynamic DNS where your current IP address is at. So people can always go to your URL and end up at your DD-WRT router. You can do that through software on a PC as well, but it's kind of handy that the DD-WRT router does that on its own. Another thing is some ISPs, I see a lot of them kind of going away from this, but I know Insight BB in Louisville still does this to some degree. They register your MAC address on your PC, and they're expecting the call setup to be done from that. And when you replace that device, it doesn't work, and you have to make a trouble call, and usually they don't know what you're talking about, and you spend an hour on the phone to find out that they need to update the MAC address that you're using. DD-WRT takes care of that to where you can just say use MAC address cloning, and you tell it which machine you want it to clone, and it'll look at that machine's MAC address and present it back to the ISP so that you don't have to do anything. Kind of handy. This firmware supports some features that you wouldn't expect, especially in some low-end router. It supports RIP. Well, RIP's not that big of a deal, but BGP, it'll do BGP routing. You can also do static routes if you've got a complex network in your house and you want to put static routes in, you can. It supports VLANs, which is surprising for inexpensive, free piece of software on inexpensive hardware. And you can, obviously you can set the Ethernet port settings if you're having trouble with auto negotiation. You can set the speed and duplex independently. There's several modes this can run in, and this is one of the features that I think is really cool. And I'm going to go through those options here in just a minute. But it supports AP mode, which is normal access point, like any of the out-of-the-box Linksys, Netgear, whatever. It operates like you would expect them to. It has a client mode, it has a client bridge mode, ad hoc, repeater, and repeater bridge. Depending on your hardware, you can tell it, do you want it to run one specific wireless protocol, or do you want it to run mixed mode? This example came from is B&G capable, and I have it in mixed mode. Oh yeah, a creativity in SSID naming is now an FCC requirement if you didn't know that. I suggest you come up with something interesting for your home network. My current one is divide by zero, which is kind of a little joke if you're a programming type person. In the past, I've used parity error virus configure, and my favorite is Jeff loves Vista 64 Ultimate. When I was preparing for this, myself and Jeff Jarecki over here and Adrian, we were at a coffee shop planning for all this and working on our presentations, and Jeff was using Vista 64 Ultimate and having just a few problems with it and about ready to throw his computer out the window, and that's when the jokes ensued. So if you see the Vista jokes, that's what that's about. And if you have any questions at all about Vista 64 Ultimate, please contact Jeff. He's a fan. One thing I want to point out, if you don't know this, and surprisingly a lot of people don't know this, when you set up the channel that your access point is going to be on, please use channel 1, 6, or 11. A lot of people don't realize that. They go out and do a survey if they're smart enough to use NetStumbler or something, look at the channels that are used and say, hey, nobody's using channel 3, 4, or 5, I'll pick one of those. Well, what happens when you do that, if you look at this chart, that will step on some of the other frequencies. If you look at, to get 3 full channels out there without any overlap at all, you have to use 1, 6, and 11. And you can see they don't step on each other at all. But if somebody goes in here and uses 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, you're overlapping 1 and 6. So you may be having problems yourself because of other people on those other channels, or you may be causing problems for somebody else. If everybody would stay on those 3 top channels there, we'd have a lot less problems collectively. Like I mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about the modes that it uses. AP mode is just like any other wireless access point that you would buy at Walmart or Best Buy or whatever. Plug it in, plug in your ISP on one side, and on the other side you can have wired clients or you can have wireless clients. That is pretty much the same functionality you would see, out of the box. Oh, and if you're using Vista 64 Ultimate, you may have to provide admin credentials. Ad hoc mode, it supports ad hoc mode. Can anybody think of a good reason why you would want to use ad hoc mode? I don't know of any, but it does support that. If you wanted to set up your WRT in ad hoc mode, you could. Standard wireless bridge. This is, if you've been around in networking for a long time and you dealt with bridges way back, like in the 80s, a wireless bridge joins 2 networks on the same subnet. Just basically, it's like physically tying 2 switches together, but you're doing it, in this case, via wireless. So you could buy a couple of these inexpensive routers, put them in wireless bridge mode, and join the 2 networks together, have the same subnet. Everybody's on the same network across this wireless link. There is what is called a bridge repeater, or repeater mode, or bridge repeater mode, and what this lets you do is have not only wired clients on the other side of the bridge, but also have wireless clients. The advantage of this, obviously, you can have both wired and wireless, but the disadvantage is you're sharing the available bandwidth across that wireless link with the wireless clients. So, part of that's being used for the bridge, part of it's being used for the wireless clients. It'll slow things down just a little bit, but in most cases, people are just trying to get internet access anyway, so it's probably acceptable. It supports all the normal wireless encryption protocols, WPA, WPA2, personal and enterprise, actually. You can connect this up to a radius server if you happen to have one at your house. How many people have radius servers? Anybody? Hey, we got 1, 2. All right, cool. Awesome. You're using DDWRT at your work. That's very cool. I think there's a good testimonial there. When I first saw this, I thought, how reliable is this? Is it going to be flaky? Whatever. I have really good success with this. In fact, when you're talking about consumer grade access points, this is better quality than what I bought off the shelf. I see his head's nodding. He feels the same way. Supports TKIP AES or TKIP plus AES. It supports MAC filtering. Anybody in here think MAC filtering helps on wireless networks for security? Okay, good. Nobody raised their hand. You can do that. A lot of us have done that in the past and then realized later it's really too easy to spoof a MAC address. And again, if you're using Vista 64 Ultimate, you may have to provide admin credentials. You can set a fixed transmit rate if you like. Most people just leave that to auto and it'll pick the highest one that it can negotiate. It supports some advanced features, and these are kind of some of the things that are kind of cool. It supports AP isolation, which if you turn that on, it provides a separate subnet range to each client that attaches. So you end up in a 2-address subnet, and what that results in is, if I turn this on and all you guys connected to it, you would not be able to send traffic to your neighbors, which is kind of cool for security. It has a, you can set the transmit and receive antennas. Like most of these routers, they come out and they have 1 antenna, and then Linksys comes out with 2 antennas, and everybody thinks, mass market thinks 2 antennas must be better. if you don't know that already, you know, it does auto detection, decides which one has the best signal, and uses that one in most cases on most of these routers. But with DD-WRT, you can actually tell it which one to use if you have a preference, or maybe you're using an external antenna and you want to tell it, don't use the other one, use this one that's going out to some larger antenna, or you can actually tell it to use one for transmit, one for receive. You can change the, looking at the bottom of the screen there, you can change the transmit power. This is another one of those things you want to be careful with. You know, it's like overclocking your PC. Yeah, you can crank that way up, but you also run risk of damaging the hardware. And the other thing is, if you haven't played with that, you would think more milliwatts is better on transmit, but that is not always the case, because when you increase the milliwatt transmit power, you're also increasing noise and reflection. Again, I would recommend, enable SSH. There's a lot of things you can do through that. It even supports syslog, so if you've got a syslog server set up, you can point it to that. And I have a little note there. You don't have to have a syslog server. It retains a small amount of those in the router that you can look at. And again, disable telnet. You shouldn't be using that because it's in the clear. If you've got kids at home, you want to keep them off the internet past a certain hour, you can put in time restrictions and let that take care of itself. It has an option for a DMZ. I think most of the consumer-based ones have this as well. This is where you can say, I want to make this machine my web server, or my mail server, whatever, and I'm going to call it a DMZ, but it's off one of the Ethernet ports on the back. And once you've done this, you can set up rules to, oh, I'm sorry, I have a note there. Like I said, it's been a while since I looked at this. If you turn this on, it'll open up all inbound ports. So basically you're saying expose this to the internet. When people come inbound and connect to the router's IP, send it to this guy. You don't want to do that. Here's where you can set that up if you want to allow inbound services to a server. Here's where you have port forwarding rules, allow rules on TCP, UDP, or both, and tell it what IP address to go to. Rather than doing what that last couple of slides just described, if you're doing this, you're doing this on a budget, you're at your house, but you're going to run some servers or something you want to be able to access. Maybe you want SSH access to a box at home remotely. That's all well and good, but I would suggest just buy 2 of these things and put them in a configuration like this, where you have the one that is your exterior firewall router, and you connect all of your DMZ devices directly to it, and then from that you connect another one of these inexpensive firewall router wireless access points to go to your internal network. What you end up with is the equivalent of a 3-legged firewall, but you didn't really spend a lot of money on it. It's really cheap to do and much better. I mean, because obviously on a DMZ, always assume that somebody's going to own your devices on there, and if that happened, you wouldn't want them to be able to get to your internal devices. This would prevent that. Another really good feature about this is, I know a lot of people want to do VPN back to their house. They want it to be as secure as possible. You can go out and you can buy some inexpensive VPN routers. The first one I looked at, I was disappointed to find out that once you've bought the router for like $250, you get it home and you find out that now you've got to spend another $100 for each client you want to connect to it. DD-WRT gives you a much better way to do that. It supports OpenVPN, which is free, and runs on Windows, most all Windows flavors. And it also supports TunnelBlick, which runs on OS 10. I do not. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I have not played with that one. Okay, that was the one I found, and I actually had some trouble getting the VPN portion to work on this version of code, but it's probably been fixed by now, or either I was doing something wrong, one of the two. The process for doing that's a little more involved, but it's not that difficult. There's good instruction sets out on the internet, but basically you use say you're using Windows and OpenVPN, use OpenVPN to create all your key sets. You do that from a command prompt in Windows, and they've got batch files, and there's some detail there, but they got batch files to do all of that. And once you've created all of those, you go into DD-WRT and you paste those into this screen, which is under Services and VPN. You put your CRT, your certificate, in that box, and you got a server cert, server key, and your Diffie-Hellman information, and a little bit of scripting down there at the bottom, which there's examples of. But you paste all this into the DDWRT config, save it out, and from that point on, you should, well, there's one more step, but you'll be able to connect up a VPN client. The other thing you have to do is tell the firewall it's okay to let those ports in, and just some IP tables commands will allow that. And from that point on, you should be able to connect the VPN client. I cannot remember why I put this slide in there, but I have, I'll just move on. Here's some links on it. Again, there's tons of information out there on this. If you haven't played with it, I would suggest it. It's a lot of fun and a ton of good features. And questions, there's my websites. Again, check them out for Bollard Education. And does anybody have any questions? Hopefully this gives you a real basic overview of what this can do for you.
What is a Bollard?
A Bollard is, it's kind of funny. When I went out and got CISSP certification, I went with a friend of mine. We signed up just like a few weeks out. You know, we both knew if we didn't like sign up for it immediately, we were never going to do it. So we just like committed, signed out like 3 or 4 weeks out. Went and did the test, which is, of course, is grueling if any of you guys have done that. And we're coming back, and he's like, you know, do you learn anything? Or do you think you passed? I'm like, I don't know. He's like, do you pass? And he's like, I don't know. And I just told him, I said, you know, there's I don't care if somebody else pays for it. I'm not taking that test again, is the way I felt. And so he ends up asking me, did you learn anything? And I'm like, yeah, now I know what a Bollard is, you know, from studying for CISSP exam. And if you don't know, a Bollard is the physical security device that keeps you from driving up on sidewalks, you know, the little metal poles or whatever, concrete, whatever you see them at gas stations to keep you from running over the, you know, the gas pumps, whatever. My favorites are Bollard, those big round balls they have out there. But anyway, that's what that site's about. You can go see lots of pictures of Bollards that I collect as I drive my motorcycle around. Do you have a question back there? Dual WAN, I have not, but the new version does support that. You talk about running multiple SSIDs off the same box, it does support that, and that is a very cool feature, it does. But I have not played with that. That's good to know. I've been meaning to play with that myself. In fact, I'm probably going to buy Asus's. They've got one that's got lots of RAM and flash in it, and it also has multiple USB ports on it, which the other thing I want to do, and I meant to mention in here, I don't think I did, if you've got USB ports, you can have NAS devices attached to it. So, you know, I want my Mac to do time machine backups wirelessly. I can plug in a USB hard drive into the access point and do that remotely, I think. Adrian? Mm-hmm. Good deal. All right. Does anybody else have any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. And if anybody is planning InfoSec conference type stuff and wants to talk, you know, and learn from my mistakes, feel free to look me up. Thank you.